So some context for the development of the show. I typically begin my projects by trying to think of who I'm doing it for. I always find this useful, doubly so during this absurd time we live in. It helped me clarify who I feel I'm responsible to as a curator, as one who cares, if the Latin roots of the word can offer instruction. This show is for you. For one, because you're the only ones who are going to see it. But even if this weren't true, you would have been the ones who would have spent the most time with it. So the question is, what can I do for you? What can I offer you? And if it is this exhibition, why here? Why now? Because some or all of you are working in the space. During a time like this, perhaps more than any other, I feel the responsibility to say something about work that I respect. The artworks I have chosen for each of you express something I feel about your projects. I offer them as an opinion, commentary, audience, context, if I might be so bold, encouragement from an interested and engaged audience. Really, I offer them to you in any way you choose to interpret them, but I hope you like them. I hope they speak to you individually, collectively, in ways you find useful to your work. Each work was chosen individually based on your brief project descriptions that I saw at the beginning of this year. I've tried to keep up with the updates. I know the titles have changed, some of the descriptions have changed, but there are labels in the space that sort of freeze you in time, perhaps in the past that you've moved from. I can only hope that my interpretations of your projects remain relevant, and at the very least suggest to you a possible interpretation that a public audience that looks like me and thinks like me might have. I also want to say that as we go on, I will have less and less left to say about each work in sequence, because I might cover some aspects while speaking about other works. Now I know that some of you have been able to access and work in the space, so I'm going to conduct this sort of like a walkthrough. Each work in the space has a label that contains only 4 pieces of information: your name, the name of your project, as it was when I updated this, the artwork's title, and the artist's name. Each label is actually printed as though the name of your project is the title of the work. There is no other information, no exhibition title, no curatorial essay, no explanatory panel, no dates, not even my name as curator, just the titles. I hope these decisions will justify themselves as you experience the exhibition. Where I think it might be necessary for the rest of our audience, my colleagues today, to have a brief description of your projects beyond the title alone, I might offer it to them taken from your descriptions, although again, the primary audience is you. Now, please correct me if I make any errors, and feel free to have a conversation in the chat. I cannot keep track while I'm going through the slides, but I'll look through it later. There's a little floor plan on the side if you ever find yourself in the JHI to know the works I'm talking about. So the first work, as you enter the space on your left, this enormous print by Carol Condé and Carl Beveridge. It's called The Fall of Water, and it's for Max Liboiron and their research project, Anti-Colonial Scientific Laboratory Collectives. This print is based on a painting from the 16th century by Peter Bruegel the Elder called The Fall of the Rebel Angels. It's a pretty classic good versus evil narrative. You know, the rebellion of Lucifer against the authority. The painting is divided into heaven and hell. In the top left, we have the better angels chasing the rebel angels out from the shadows and into the light, proclaiming their victory. In the center, the archangel Michael beats the rebels down with his sword while he stands on the 7-headed beast of the apocalypse. This inclusion marks an interesting thing about this painting, which is that it brings together 2 biblical stories, one from the beginning and one from the end. Top right, faithful angels trumpet encouragement. At the bottom left, another beast, this one half human, half lizard, shows its rear end to the viewer as a sign of contempt. At the bottom right, a strange armadillo-like beast. Armadillos are native to Turtle Island, and as an exotic animal to Bruegel's Europe, were considered monstrous. Many of the monsters in this painting are interpretations of such exotic animals. What does all of this mean for the fall of water? Well, here the battle is fought against the politicorporate forces of darkness that seek to control and privatize waterways around the world. The better angels top left are activists from the Narmada Bachao Andolan, the movement to save the Narmada River, who won their case against the Indian government in the year 2000. The archangel, an activist from one of the many indigenous communities in Bolivia who participated in the Cochabamba protests in 2000 against the American Bechtel Corporation that sought to privatize that city's municipal water supply. Bottom left, in hell, the same half-human, half-lizard, Bechtel Corporation expresses its contempt. Top right, the angels trumpeting encouragement are indigenous water warriors from Canada. Bottom right, riot police, soldiers of the colonial state, exotic to Turtle Island, beasts from Europe this time, and the beast of the apocalypse that the archangel trots upon is a man in a black suit whose skin is made of money. Each reference point in the original has its counterpoint here. Of course, a ready criticism of this work is that it takes all of these world cultures, Indians from India such as myself and Indians from America, and collectivizes them together against a common enemy. Perhaps this is misguided and simplistic, or perhaps the only defense against a Hegelian narrative of scientific progress wielded by corporations like a club while they stab with the calculated dagger of individual responsibility is a Marxist collectivity of peoples. I'm not sure I agree entirely, but I don't think I disagree either. I don't know if I can be that optimistic, but I don't want to be a cynic either. At the very least, it's a good story, and I hope you like it. Right across from this work is this sculpture by Gordon Petoran called Reassembled Form, Fokera Compotit, and their project, An Implicated Orchestra. This project concerns a collective orchestra of traditional Croatian stringed instruments made up of members of 3 generations of an immigrant Croatian community in Sault Ste. Marie. Now this artwork clearly does not require as detailed a reading as the previous one, so it does provide some visual relief, but it offers points to contemplate rather than stories to study. The sculpture consists of recycled found wooden parts held together by specifically fabricated brass fixings, taken from their place of origin, lost in an unfamiliar context, found and assembled with great care and specific design into something new, something perhaps true to origin in some way, but also profoundly different. What does it mean to put together something from somewhere else into something here? Does the weight of the colonial state squash everything it sits on into the same old, or can the pieces of our individual identities in this place, fraught with other histories, other pieces, be put together in a shape not entirely unfamiliar, but not familiar either, into something strange, something old, something new? There's a famous mural at Goldsmiths College in London of a line attributed to Mark Fisher that reads, "Emancipatory politics must always destroy the appearance of a natural order, must reveal what is presented as necessary and inevitable to be a mere contingency, just as it must make what was previously deemed to be impossible seem attainable." I'm not suggesting that this assemblage contains all of these ideas, but I certainly hope it acts as a point of strangeness that reminds you of them. The wall behind and to the right is this one. And starting from the first work on the right, this untitled drawing by Jesse Unark, which is for Khaled Abu Jayab and their project, Intercultural Exchanges and the Formation of Collective Identities. This project looks at archaeological research conducted in the Southern Caucasus to investigate the social practices that lead to the emergence of completely new social realities. During the 1950s, the annual caribou migration near Jesse Unark's community in Back River, Kiwatin, Nunavut, a community of the people of the place where there is soapstone. Now, I watched several videos to learn the correct way to say the original name instead of relying on the translation, but I'm not anywhere close to confident enough to try. Anyway, the caribou migrated away from where they lived and they nearly starved. Her son made the trek to Baker Lake, a distance farther than the distance between Toronto and Ottawa, to get help. When she got to Baker Lake, she began to draw her stories, including the one we saw of her family's journey. Last year, I saw a video by the artist collective The New Red Order at the Toronto Biennial, and at one point in the video, they discussed the word apocalypse, which comes from Greek and originally described a revelation, a shift in knowledge, or a shift into a completely new social reality. In their video, the artists offer as experts in navigating an apocalypse indigenous peoples who have already survived one. In Jessie Unark's drawings, her stories change each time they are retold. Her stories are not records, but memories. This drawing says, we're all going somewhere. We don't yet know where we're going, what it's going to look like, or what we're going to have to do. We're carrying what we can. We're leaving some things behind. Some of us need help. Some of us have been through this before. When I consider her stories, a question I like to think about is the title of a recent essay by Zadie Smith. What do we want history to do to us? Next, we have Joyce Whelan's O Canada for Eve Tuck and their project Somewhere Recordings, the Land Relationship Super Collective album. This project, in collaboration with the collective, is a book-like album that makes an argument about what is possible now in terms of land rematriation by Indigenous community organizations and their collaborators. To be honest, I am a little unsettled by this artwork in relation to your project. I hope that this is a productive feeling on my part, that it is a feeling of unsettlement, as in it upsets my settlement here. I realize that I did not begin my presentation today with a personal land acknowledgement. When I attended the opening of the Toronto Biennial last year, I heard a beautiful and poetic land acknowledgement, but I couldn't help but be distracted by the enormous logos of mining companies printed on the wall at the opening, an acknowledgement of their patronage, companies that were then and are now engaged in practices that are as antithetical to land acknowledgements as it is likely possible to be. I began to feel that if I could not be certain that any acknowledgement I might make was a specific, honest action, rather than a general empty gesture, I would be better off not saying anything at all, and instead making sure that I was including Indigenous artists in my work and acknowledging both the specificity and collectivity of their stories. As a recently settled immigrant, or a recently immigrated settler, I felt I might take the risk of making this error today in front of people much smarter than I am. I learned about this work by Joyce Whelan in my first month in Canada in an undergraduate art history 101 class. We did not learn about Jessie Unark. Whelan mouthed every syllable of the national anthem and pressed her lips to the surface to make this work. Before the launch of the show where this work was first shown, she said to the press, "I think of Canada as female," and wrote about wishing to point out the perils of a masculine nationalism and her attempt to develop a feminine patriotism. Her show was called True Patriot Love. I recently became a permanent resident of Canada. I expect I will become a citizen in the next few years. What does it mean for me to be here, an Indian on Indian land? What does it mean for me to perform these actions, to request this status? Does it make my acknowledgements dishonest? I don't know. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. Interestingly, like many left-leaning Canadian public intellectuals of her time, Whelan believed that Canada was, quote, a territory doubly colonized, first by the British and then by the Americans, and her patriotism was deliberately designed to be contrary to an American-style nationalism. This brings up this next work by the Indian-Canadian artist Divya Mehra called You Made Me, part of her series Culture and Captivity, which is for Melissa Gismondi and their project Quiet Canadian, Angry American. This artwork gestures at the work of becoming a participant in society, especially the differential work required of different people and the different forms of participation afforded to different people. Is the stereotypical Canadian politeness a facade for a quiet English-style resentment true to colonial origins, or does it only sometimes feel like that? Still, some of the work of participating in a productive collective is working hard to make sure our companions in this collective are comfortable. When does this become a problem? If this work is placed under direct sunlight for long, the vibrant purple will completely fade away. Across the room is this work, a photograph by the artist Jeff Thomas called Justice Indian, Department of Justice Building, Ottawa, Ontario, for Christina Turner and their project Land Forms, the literary jurisprudence of Indigenous rights. Carved into the facade of the Department of Justice Building in Ottawa is this statue. I'm almost afraid of saying anything more. I feel I would only squash the possibilities of meaning that are present here into something far less eloquent than this photograph. At a certain time of day, reflected in the glass that protects this photograph, you might see the inverse of Divya Mehra's "I will work hard to make you feel comfortable." Outside the window behind this work is the JHI's facade, which, if you have seen it, is classically ornamented, just like the classical ornaments on the DOJ building. I don't want to spend so little time talking about this work, but the more I think about it, the more I'm certain I can't do it justice. I hope you like it as much as I do, and I'm going to just shut up for a minute while we look at it. Next up, this print by Shuvinai Ashuna called Story Boots for Carol Clark and their project Music Collectives, Evolving Operatic Practices. These are muklaks, typically made of sealskin, caribou fur, and or moose hide. Their manner of making an ornamentation specific to each family, traditionally passed down from grandmother to mother to daughter. They express the story of that family, and when a particular style is gone, the story is lost. A star goes dark in a constellation. While researching this work, I discovered that one of the biggest indigenous-owned muklak producing companies in Canada employs a group of Indian women, like from India, at their factory in Winnipeg. The muklaks themselves are made by individual artists in several different villages, according to their own personal traditional methods. The opera, a historically Italian art form, dare I say one with a somewhat stuffy reputation, at least from my point of view growing up, although this is undeserved. The overlap between our different forms of storytelling is where the potential of each of our own personal traditions comes into its full being. These boots by Shuvinai Ashuna speak of one such story, the separated heels suggesting a stylistic adaptation to modern society, while the height, collar, and left boot speak of tradition. The story on the right boot tells of a rock concert, among other things. Is it a modern story or a historical one? Is it a traditional story or a story about traditions? Every person contains all of these stories. What is the story of opera in the 21st century? What do we want it to be? In the next room, this work by Jan Poldas, titled Blue, Yellow, Red Entropy, is for Francesca and their project, The Politics of Urban Music, a case study of the Toronto hip hop community and rap music marketplace from 1985 to 2010. The database entry for this work shows it in this orientation, but on the back of this work is a signature that makes it seem like it should have been flipped around. Read from left to right in this orientation, it suggests a form of collectivity that begins with clear categories that over time blend together into an unremarkable brown. Flipped around, it might suggest a single type differentiating into specific categories. Hal Foster wrote that the marketplace of society no longer relies on processes of standardization to function successfully. Instead, postmodern pluralism, in the guise of heterogeneity and difference, fits into the expanding global market by equalizing these differences into available commodities. As a fan, and whether I'm reading from right to left or left to right, I suspect this is a pattern that makes itself known in many ways within a genre that is as successful and as identity-oriented as rap and hip-hop. Perhaps this is desirable and not inherently dangerous. If it is dangerous, is it a danger of collectivization in general, or a danger of the ever-present metaphor of the marketplace? The next work offers up different ideas of the forms, imaginations, dangers, and contexts of our current collectivity. This work by Shelley Nero, titled Treaties, from her Border series, is for Vanessa Fletcher and Ange Loft and their projects Reconciliation and Education, Artistic Actions, Critical Conversations. For anyone listening who is unfamiliar with the components of this image, at the top, a two-row wampum, likely alluding to the 17th century treaty between the artists Mohawk people as members of the Five Nations Confederacy and the Dutch, offers a metaphor of two rivers that run parallel but do not cross to describe the agreed upon relationship between these nations. In the middle, the two outstretched and clasped arms, one of which is the artist's, a path through which agreement flows, a path that might also be a border, but nevertheless a path, and not a path from some long forgotten history, but a path today with a specific person. At the bottom, a reflecting image of the Mohawk Valley from which the artist's people fled in the 18th century after what else? An American genocide. This work is all for a history lesson, a treaty reminder, a personal statement, and perhaps an invitation. Two different forms of collectivity in a room of meeting. Across the room, This work, Counterpoint by Rita Latondra for Shulzar Braza and their project Reimagining the Revolution, Agrarian Mobilization and the Worker Peasant Party in Pakistan's Periphery, which is a study of the complex political and individual realities of communist-led agrarian movements in the South Punjab region of Pakistan. There are several ways in which we might interpret this print. At the time of the partition of India and Pakistan, and based on my rudimentary history, these peripheral areas had links to the Communist Party of India. Muslim nationalists found fault with some of these linkages, and the consequent fallout has influenced Indian and Pakistani politics and the identity of the region in unforeseen ways. Yet in the margins of the expanding fallout, new forms of radical politics can be seen that negotiate with the dominant regimes in surprising ways, cracking open new possibilities, new forms of citizenship, new forms of collectivity, even new forms of what it means to belong to politically engaged religious groups desperately needed histories today. Beside this, Carl Beam's Two Kinds of Power for Nadia and their project Transnational Agrarian Movements and the Normative Elaboration of International Law. Beam's deceptively simple two-piece collage describes, as the title says, two kinds of power: the mythologically rich, metaphorically potent crow, laden with interrelated meanings and stories, and the mysterious electric meter, neatly divided into individual parts, that is in a constant and exclusive state of numerical measurement and valuation. The biologist Jakob von Euschkel developed the concepts of the Umwelt and the Umgebung. The Umgebung, the modern, unitary, and entirely mythical objective world where all living beings are situated, where space, time, and meaning are equal for all creatures. The Umwelt, meanwhile, the environment world, constituted by only those things that carry significance for that species, community, or individual. Just the phrase transnational agrarian movements suggests the real, painful, slow, and worthwhile process of meaningful democracy, the stitching together of various umwelts, the task of the crow in Ojibwe myth as companion to all creatures, whereas some people would have us believe that true collectivity is to pretend that the world is best represented by numerals. If this election and the absolutely useless polls leading up to it have taught us anything, it should be to suspect any easy reliance on numeral-based power. The Anthropology of the Image by Jerome Havre for Robin Autry and their project Selfishly Black. Unlike the story told by the similarly colorful blue, yellow, red entropy directly opposite this work, here each color a secret that conceals the private life of each individual. Some colors related, but no two colors alike. All in the same vessel, traversing the same river, but each their own. Their secrets, their identities, and their stories belong to them. Some of them look at us, but we are limited in our perception of them. What do these colors make together? Is it necessary that they always complement each other in ways that are legible to us? We recognize their difference, even though the specific differences may not be legible to us. This is fine. They owe us nothing. Their image is their own. In the office, Jean Bridges' piece, Numerical Territory, for Girish Daswani and their project, Activist and Artistic Responses to Corruption in Ghana. I have a funny story about this actually. My friends in India tell me about a new strategy they've developed to deal with corrupt police officers who ask for bribes by people who need to go out during the quarantine. They squeeze a drop of hand sanitizer into the outstretched palm of the police officer before dropping in the cash. The officer typically reacts with some shame on being shown this small gesture of care and will return some, but not all, of the money. When my brother told me about the first time this worked for him, we instantly began to refer to that police officer as such a nice guy. In so many places, as a consequence of imposed colonial or imperial structures, new forms of political action begin to develop. And although they may seem impenetrable to some of us elsewhere, patterns exist within the systems that citizens learn to navigate. Corrupt? Certainly, but we must not be too quick to compare them negatively in comparison to systems we happen to be familiar with. The familiar ones contain their own forms of corruption and are differently impenetrable. Sometimes they make even less sense than their foreign counterparts. Finally, the last work in the show, Lynn Cohen's photograph of a classroom in an emergency measures college for Jennifer Ross and their project Counterterrorism and Resistance in 21st Century America. If the past 4 years in American and global politics have made anything clear, it's that emergency decisions have a funny way of becoming policy, but policies are only the sedimentation of politics. This is a classroom in a college meant to be used only in emergencies. We, all of us today, operate in classrooms during an emergency. This is an emergency. Who do we call on during an apocalypse? What do they want to teach us? What are we willing to learn? Where do we go from here?